We'll now analyze the latest with Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies, University College Dublin. Good to have you with us again. Let's jump right in there. That comment by the High Representative, the Chief Diplomat of the EU, what do you make of her statement? Is she right?
Oh, I think in terms of military capability, and this has been said not just by Kaja Kallas, but it was said by Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, Kyiv is ready to provide drone interceptors, which would be used against those Iranian munitions that are being fired in retaliation over the war between U.S. and Israel. It's just a consequence of Russia's full-scale invasion that Ukraine's now amongst the world leaders in terms of technology for interceptors, and they're needed because the U.S. and the military warned this before Donald Trump joined Israel in going to war last Saturday. The U.S. has a shortage of those interceptors if this is a protracted conflict. So it's also political, of course, though, because it's Kallas showing the U.S. in particular, look, Ukraine can contribute here to your military when we need you to contribute to European and Ukrainian security.
And also, I think focusing on Europe now for a minute, we've had certain deployments, as we know that certain actual missiles hit an RAF base in Cyprus. Also, Turkey apparently shot down some missiles. So where are we with this? I mean, how close are we to any kind of Article 4, Article 5? What's NATO's position on all this going to be?
Well, I mean, in terms of individual operations, they're still relatively limited once you get beyond retaliation against the Gulf states in the Middle East. So you had that Iranian drone attack. One drone got through, two were intercepted on the UK's Akrotiri air base in Cyprus. Then the Iranians, and I just can't understand why they did this, but they fired a missile towards Turkey, and that was intercepted by NATO defenses. But what you're seeing here is not to invoke Article 5. We're not at that point, but you're seeing NATO allies make it very clear that they are going to beef up the defense of areas like Cyprus, like Turkey, and also give assistance to the Gulf states. We don't know how much firepower Iran has. We don't know how long they can carry on the retaliation. We don't know how wide they would go. But the reality here is that in what is an uncontained war, you have to make these preparations.
Also, we're talking about war, but let's also talk economics for a minute. This has just come out. This is interesting in terms of oil, the economy. A waiver, apparently, from the United States to India, a 30-day waiver that they can resume importing Russian gas, Russian oil. I mean, this was so important to Trump. This is important to Ukraine to kind of hem in sanctions, hem in the Kremlin. What does this say? Is this strategy coming undone? What kind of damage is this going to have?
Well, it certainly has an immediate effect because, only a few months ago, the United States announced 50% tariffs on India, in part because of the purchases of Russian oil. But even more seriously, the U.S. sanctions on Russian oil companies, on Rosneft and Gazprom, included secondary sanctions, which meant that 6 of 7 Indian refiners cut their purchases from Russia. And a reminder, India is Russia's second largest customer. I think the longer-term effects, it depends on whether this is just a 30-day waiver or goes beyond. If it's a 30-day waiver, it means just simply that oil is in transit, can now be imported by the Indians without penalty. If you go beyond the 30 days, then India can make purchases of new shipments because, of course, that's the way it works. It takes time for oil to be transported. So I'd say it's not good news, certainly not good news in terms of that we need enforcement of sanctions against the Russians, but it could be limited in its damage provided it does not carry on through the spring.
So oil, economics, everything tied together. Also, one thing, we're getting information. I mean, we don't know the scale of it yet. Apparently, it's only a small number at this point in time. But if we're looking at the scale of this, migration concerns are there. We have a statement here in light of everything that happened from the Swedish migration minister who says here, I'm quoting, so far there are no signs of major movements, but the situation could change very quickly. Don't want that repeated. What we're looking back at 2015, the refugee crisis across Europe. How much is that also weighing in this, and how close are we, in your mind, to this really going back to what we saw in 2015?
We're not there yet with respect to Iran. We're in the seventh day of the war. It is causing immense destruction, and it is killing civilians as well as the military. But we're not seeing huge flows of people trying to leave the country yet. But it's an uncontained war, and we're also seeing that Israel is expanding attacks on Lebanon, including ordering the more than 500,000 people to evacuate their homes in southern Beirut last night. Now, again, we haven't seen Lebanese people then go further and leave the country yet. But you have to say that unless we have a clear idea of when this U.S.-Israel war is going to end, we have the potential for a surge in people trying to leave for other countries, albeit not on the scale that we saw with, I think, 6.6 million people who left Syria after the uprising in 2011. Mm-hmm.
Now, Scott, we talked on Saturday morning when all this kicked off. We're trying to make sense of it all. Looking also now what Donald Trump has said in the last sort of day, I believe, to the Times, saying that he has no time limits in terms of everything. He has no time limits on anything, and he wants to get this done. Changing narratives, objectives, what is that U.S. strategy going to be moving forward?
Here's a tip to the news media. Never headline with Donald Trump's latest statement. Go to what the reality is here. And the reality is that the Trump administration and possibly Israel have no plan B at this moment. Plan A was to bomb the regime into submission. Israel wanted a complete regime change. The U.S. is willing to allow the regime to stay in place, but it has to surrender to American demands over nuclear and ballistic missile programs. But the regime hasn't given up, even though the supreme leader has been killed. So what do you do next? I think, it's going to be difficult for the Trump camp to put American boots on the ground inside Iran. The U.S. population is quite averse to that. There are still memories of Iraq 2003 and of Afghanistan. So if you don't put boots on the ground, how do you push the regime out? You probably can't do it with just air power. There is another scheme, which American officials are leaking, which is they're going to try to move Iranian Kurdish fighters across the border from Iraq back into Iran to stir up uprisings. Shades of what they tried to do in 1991 to undermine Saddam Hussein. But even if you could cause trouble in Western Iran with part of the country being split off, the regime would still be in power in Tehran. So Trump is blustering. Trump is blustering because he likes to kill people and he likes to blow up stuff, but that doesn't bring a political resolution to this war.
Hi, I'm Scott Lucas. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, subscribe, spread the word, send ideas.